Aloha. Welcome to Island Issues, a weekly program exploring Hawaii Island's issues, problems, and solutions. Now, here's your host, Sherry Bracken.
Aloha, good Sunday morning. Welcome to Island Issues. We're here on the radio every Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. on KKOA Country 107.7 FM and online, koacountry.com. And at 8 a.m., Lava 105.3 FM and online at 8, lava1053.com. And you may now listen to some past Island Issues interviews at our news website, bigislandnewscenter.com. They're down on the right. We have about the most recent 8 interviews there. Our website has information about our upcoming schedule, islandissues.com. Our guest today is former Governor Linda Lingle. As only the 6th governor of the state of Hawaii, she had quite a number of firsts. First Republican elected governor of Hawaii since 1962, first county mayor elected governor of Hawaii, first female governor of Hawaii, first Jewish governor of Hawaii. Prior to becoming governor, Linda Lingle served as Maui County mayor, Maui County council member, and chair of the Hawaii Republican Party. Working backwards, Linda Lingle graduated with honors from Cal State University Northridge in 1975. She then came to Hawaii, working first in Honolulu as a public information officer for the Teamsters and Hotel Workers Union. Later, she moved to Molokai, where she started the Molokai Free Press, a community newspaper. And then she served on Maui County Council starting in 1980, and after 3 terms, in what the Honolulu Advertiser called one of the greatest upsets in Hawaii politics, she became Maui County's youngest and first female mayor. Good morning. Aloha, Governor Lingle.
Good morning, Sherry. Great to be here with you.
What got you interested in moving into the field of politics and serving the county of Maui and then the state of Hawaii?
Well, it happened when I was living on Molokai and I was watching the politics. Because there is no government on the island, we were guaranteed 1 seat on the Maui Council, and we didn't even have 1 representative in the state legislature. So I would watch the politicians come onto the island from Maui or Honolulu, and I felt people on my island, Molokai, were not being properly represented. And the issue that galvanized it for me had to do with senior citizens. They would meet in Kaunakakai in the Mitchell Paoli Center, and they didn't have any ceiling fans or air conditioning. And it's very, very hot in Kaunakakai, especially in the summer. And the drinking fountain, the county wouldn't even pay the electricity so they could have a cold drink of water. So there was a water fountain, but the water came out warm. And that infuriated me. I was 27 years old, and I decided I'm going to do something about it. And I ran for council, and I was so fortunate. People came out to help me, and I was able to win. And it was especially tough that first time because the way the council races are run in Maui County is that you have to run at large. So I had to run on Lanai, Molokai, and Maui, and I had never been to Maui before at that point. And Maui had, as a percentage of the population at that time, Maui had maybe 70,000 people. Molokai had only 6. So I could have won every vote on my home island and lost, but I was able to go to Maui and keep meeting new people, and they came out to help me. And then my friends on Molokai, in the days before social media, they would send little postcards, and they would say, when this haole wahine comes to your door, please be nice to her and help her. And the lady who helped me from the very beginning, Auntie Mary Rollins, who has since passed away, she was very active in the paddling community. And so that's how I got to know a lot of people on Maui, was through her.
Not long after you left office, you served as governor for 8 years, 2 terms, term limited out. I got a press release that you were going to become part of the Bipartisan Policy Center, in fact, a founding member of the Governor's Council there. Tell us about the Bipartisan Policy Center, which I know is a nonprofit based in Washington, but tell us what they do and what you've been doing working with them.
Well, I was invited to become one of the 6 governors who were founding members of their council. There were 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats who had just left office at the end of 2010. And we were chosen because of the success we had in working in a bipartisan fashion. The Bipartisan Policy Center is a $25 million a year privately funded think tank. 90% of the money comes from foundations, only 10% is corporate. And they try to come up with solutions across party lines to the issues facing the nation. I think the most well-known report that they issued was the one headed up by Alice Rivlin and Pete Domenici. Alice Rivlin had been the budget director under under President Clinton, and Pete Domenici had been a Republican senator from the state of New Mexico. And their report became a basis for a lot of the discussion that has gone on around the debt and deficit issues. It's just usually known as the Rivlin-Domenici Plan, but it came from the Bipartisan Policy Center. So we work on issues like immigration, Medicaid issues for the states. And the reason the governors were asked to start this council is because the rules and the laws that are passed in Washington often don't take into consideration what the impact would be in an individual state. And so they wanted governors to give them a dose of reality as they're coming up with these proposals to say these really affect people out in the states and they're different. So this one-size-fits-all may not be the way to go sometimes. My next meeting is in June in Washington, and in between we write papers on different issues. We interact with the federal departments, like on Medicaid. We deal with Health and Human Services. But it's been a good way to stay involved with policy issues and recognize how important it is to work across party lines when you're coming up with solutions, because the issues that face America, they're not Republican problems and they're not Democrat problems, they're America's problems. So we're going to have to come together in order to move forward. And when there's an unwillingness to come together, to compromise, to see the other side's point of view, you get the gridlock that you see now in Washington. And that's one of the reasons I decided to jump into this U.S. Senate race, because I think I have a unique experience at working across party lines. To be a Republican in Hawaii, you had to work across party lines to achieve anything. And I think that experience could be very valuable right now in Washington.
Well, I was commenting when you walked in the door that you actually looked pretty relaxed. Even that, your time as governor, 8 years, was pretty intense. And you've answered pretty much why you wanted to run for Senate, but it is an intense job that you'd be jumping back into. So tell us anything more that you'd like to about why you're running for U.S. Senate.
Yeah, there are some issues that are very important to our state, and I thought I could have an impact on them in Washington. And my bottom line of why I run for the Senate is because I want to help make life better for the people here at home. And one of my ideas is to get a subcommittee created on tourism in the United States Senate. Although tourism is a major industry for America, it employs 14 million people. It makes up 9.5% of our country's gross domestic product, and yet there's not even a subcommittee. There's not even the name tourism in an existing subcommittee. So I want to get that created because there are issues we could then deal with, like the visa issue. We have a great potential to attract more visitors from China, for instance, but this ongoing visa issue has not been addressed satisfactorily, and I feel like I could have a real positive impact if I could get to the Senate, get this created, and get some changes so that additional visitors can come to our state. It would help people, would increase employment here at home. So that's an example of the kind of thing you can do in the United States Senate.
Why the United States Senate versus the United States House of Representatives?
Well, the Senate represents the entire state. If you get elected as a senator, you're not just from a district, you're representing the whole state. And because I was a governor for 8 years and have had that experience, I thought it made more sense for me to try for an office that would represent all the people of the state. I'm unique in that I've lived on 3 different islands. I lived on Molokai for 10 years, I lived on Maui for 13 years, and now maybe 15 years on Oahu. So I think I have the best feel for what it is to be on Oahu and what it is to be on the neighbor islands. And I felt because I had represented the whole state, it made a lot of sense. I was experienced at it, so that's what attracted me.
Well, here we are on Hawaii Island, and you've not lived on Hawaii Island, but clearly if you are elected to the United States Senate, we're going to expect you to represent this island. So tell us how you've kept track of issues that are important to Hawaii Island and how you would keep track of those issues if you're elected.
While I was governor, I felt it was really important on the Big Island, as well as the other neighbor islands, to have a citizens committee that would keep me posted on the issues that they felt were important at any given time. So we created advisory committees, one on West Hawaii and one on East Hawaii, so that I would be kept up to date at all times. They weren't going to be paid for it. Their reward was going to be being able to bring the issues forward that their fellow community members thought were important. And those advisory committees worked really well. And so when I started this race for U.S. Senate, in fact, I was here on the Big Island. It was a lunch at the King Kamehameha Hotel. And someone asked me from the audience, well, how are you going to keep in touch with us? And he said, you should do an advisory committee like you had before. And so that's how it got into my platform. If I get elected, we'll set up those advisory committees for the neighbor islands, and that will enable me to stay in touch. We also have the ability to have a paid liaison on the neighbor islands as well, including here on the Big Island. So that's another way. As you know, I've had some great people represent me here on the Big Island. I've had Dylan Nonaka and Andy Smith, both of whom were UH Hilo graduates, and they've done a terrific job for me. It's worked really well, and I feel, while I didn't live on the Big Island, I always felt I was up to date on the issues because they were not only in touch with me, but they were in touch with all the departments of the state government. And I believe people thought it was a pretty effective way to make certain that we stayed in touch with the issues that were important here.
Governor Lingle, you are running for the job as a Republican. The Republican Party nationwide and even here in our state has seemingly started focusing much more on religious beliefs as a criterion for being the ideal Republican candidate. And here in this state, there were many people who were sort of offended in the last gubernatorial race when the, at that time, head of the Republican Party implied that the Republican candidate would be elected because he was operating under the, quote, power and authority of the name of Jesus, unquote. But Hawaii is a state with many different religious beliefs, and we have people who are Christian and Jewish and Buddhist and nothing, and we're all good people, and we all need someone to represent us. In fact, I know you talked about this very subject at a Republican gathering not long after you left office. So give us your thoughts on the role of religious beliefs and what they should be in a political campaign in us choosing a candidate.
Well, as you mentioned, a person who gets elected to office is going to represent a wide variety of people, and my commitment is to the public as a whole, not to any particular religion, or as you say, if people have no religion, I still represent them as well. I've never been comfortable with bringing religion into a political campaign. It's not something that I've ever done. I have my own beliefs, others have theirs. I'm running to get our economy back on track, to deal with the debt and deficit, to protect Social Security and Medicare for people who are either currently receiving benefits or about to start collecting. Those are the issues that I'm focused on. I'm very concerned about the nation's security, so the defense issues are very important to me as well. Those are the things I concentrate on. There are always going to be strongly held beliefs by different people, and no one's going to change anyone's mind, but that's not what running for political office is. Political office is to deal with the governmental issues that affect people's lives, and that's why I'm running for the Senate, because I believe my experience and my background best position me to help the people of our state.
Some of the Republican candidates on the national stage also have seemingly prided themselves on not believing in basic science, whether it has to do with climate change or evolution or other things that have been discussed in the past. And we here in this state have really a very scientific bent. And here on this island, we have one of the world's foremost astronomy communities. We have active volcanoes, which bring in geology and volcanism and even evolution. You as governor were a very big promoter of teaching science and technology and math in the schools. So tell us how you would expect to approach issues such as science, should they come up in the Senate if you are elected.
Well, with the issues facing America, I don't think the issues you just discussed are going to be discussed very much. We are facing a $16 trillion deficit. We have an unemployment rate that's been over 8% now for a very long time. I think anyone who gets elected to office in 2012 is going to stay focused like a laser on these issues because the American people will demand it. But your premise about climate change, including climate change with evolution in your opening comment there, is not a premise I would accept because the science is not clear. There are scientists on both sides of the climate change issue. So I'm very careful when I talk about subjects because, as you say, science is factually based. And just because people keep repeating the same thing over and over again doesn't make it true. And the fact is, I think we have to recognize when there are disagreements on issues, especially when they're scientifically based. But for me, especially after the 2012 election, the American public is not going to stand for this kind of diversion. They're going to want people focused on get the debt under control, make certain our country remains strong, create jobs. And I think for anyone who's running for office now who doesn't clearly understand what the main issues are, they're going to have a hard time in a campaign, whether it's in Hawaii or anywhere else, because the public understands clearly what the issues are. I haven't had one person ask me about climate change or evolution at any event on any island, and I'm out every day, all day long. What they're asking me about is Social Security going to be there for me? How about the debt and what it means to my children and the taxes they're going to have to pay? That's what the public is interested in, and they're right. They're right on the right track.
Oh, I don't disagree at all. I've at times tried to figure out why on the national stage they seem to focus away from the issues that you're bringing up, because those seem to be the issues that are important. A reminder, you're listening to Island Issues, and I'm your host, Sherry Bracken. Island Issues airs every Sunday morning on KKOA Country at 6:30 a.m. and on Lava 105 at 8 a.m. We're talking with former Governor Linda Lingle, who left office at the end of 2010 after 8 years as Hawaii's governor and has now decided to run for the United States Senate seat of the retiring Senator Daniel Akaka. You have demonstrated many times that your views seem to be based more on what's happening here in Hawaii than what the national Republican platform is. There are areas where you diverge from the, quote, Republican, unquote, thinking. So if you are elected, help us understand how you will make your decisions. How important is the Republican national platform?
The fortunate thing for me is that people have 8 years of watching me at the state level, so they know that I put people over party. That's why the slogan of my campaign is people first. People know I'm a Republican. They voted for me as a Republican. They're not confused at all about which party I run under. On the other hand, they also know I have never put my party ahead of the people of the state. And the same would hold true on a national level. So when people talk to me about, well, how about if President Obama is for something, he gets reelected, are you going to oppose him or are you going to support him? And I make it very clear, and this is one of the most important points I like to make to people, is that if I can win this race, I don't work for Barack Obama, and if Mitt Romney wins, I don't work for Mitt Romney. I work for the people of Hawaii. So my decisions would be based on what's in our interest here at home, not what some national platform or a national agenda is. Clearly, again, people know that I'm a fiscal conservative. They know that I'm very strong on national defense issues, but they also know that I review the facts of the situation and I judge it against what's the impact going to be on the people I represent. And I feel when people vote for me, they're the ones I'm going to answer to, not to the party and not to the president, for that matter. I think having been a governor and a mayor, you're used to leadership, and people know they're not going to push me around. Nobody's going to muscle me because they know it's not going to work, first of all, and there's no point in doing that. I'm a person who has strong convictions, and if I believe my position is what the people of Hawaii would want, then that's the position I'm going to take.
Governor, you yourself have mentioned Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about changes needed in those programs because our country doesn't have the financial flexibility it did. Tell us what you see as being the future of those programs.
Well, let's take Social Security and Medicare, first of all. For people who are currently receiving benefits under Social Security and Medicare and those approaching, there should not be a change in the benefits that they've planned on in their life. This is something their government told them they were going to be entitled to. It's something they designed a plan around for their own life. I look at my dad, he's 86 years old. He counts on that Social Security. He knows what his rent is and the maintenance is, and he still drives a car, and he knows what food costs, and he bases his life on that. Now to come at this stage and tell someone like my dad, well, yeah, because we politicians in Washington spent all the money, we're going to have to take back what you were promised. That's something I just could never support. I think once a government makes a promise, they should keep that promise to those people currently collecting and those approaching. But for younger people, we will have to admit to the American people, especially to the young, that the system cannot sustain itself. It can't be the same going forward. And the reason is, when this system was designed in the mid-1930s, Social Security, the average person, from when they started collecting benefits to when they passed away, 3 years went by. So the whole system was designed to pay you for 3 years. My dad's 86. He started collecting when he was 65 years old. That's 21 years. So this system mathematically cannot sustain itself. So that means there will have to be changes. I think there will have to be some means testing involved. There'll have to be some studies done on an actuarial basis that tells you the average American now lives to be 85 or 90, used to be 65 or 68. And as that age goes up, and this is for the younger people, you will have to raise that age at which you can start collecting benefits. So they're going to have to be a combination of things, means testing, an actuarial basis for when you can start collecting, and you will likely also have to charge the 6.2% on a greater amount of income than we do currently. Mathematically, this system will collapse if these kinds of changes aren't made. So if there is a candidate out there running for the Senate and they say it can just stay the way it is and things will get better, you know they either don't know what they're talking about or they know and they just don't care. And they're willing to stay on this dead-end road and watch the whole system collapse. So for people currently collecting, we must live up to our promise. And for those who are young who will not be able to collect for 25 years, it's a quarter of a century. So if you're 37, you couldn't collect for 25 years. That gives people time to plan for their life. So I think that addresses Social Security. Medicare is a much more difficult issue, and I think we will need to wait to see what happens with what's known as Obamacare and the Supreme Court decision, because Obamacare cuts $500 billion from Medicare over the next 10 years. And what impact that would have, we'll have to wait and see if the law stands and if those reductions are actually going to occur. But I think as a bottom line, as a first line of defense, you'd have to say we've got to cut the fraud out of the Medicare system. It is immense, and we're investigating very little of it. We need to do more. There was just a case brought recently by the Justice Department involving hundreds of millions of dollars. I would say beef up that. When I talk to people who have worked in the system, they think 25% is a very reasonable conservative amount of fraud that goes on in the system. So that's where we should start first, regardless of anything else that happens. And then again, I think means testing for Medicare. There are people of very, very high income who don't need to have Medicare, but what they tell me is we would be willing to not collect on Medicare if we knew the money was going to sustain the system for others who do need it. But we are not going to give it up just so the government has more money to spend. So there is some cynicism about whether the politicians in Washington who have been there have the ability, in fact, to stop spending at the speed that they were, rather than secure these very important programs of Social Security and Medicare. Now, Medicaid, which of course is a state-federal joint program, jointly funded for the aged, blind, and disabled, the poor, the very poor, that issue I find a little bit different. I think there you've got a very large federal bureaucracy that's unnecessary. This is one of the issues that the Bipartisan Policy Center studies. And what I would do personally is I would block grant the money to the states. So if the federal government is going to spend $1 billion a year on Medicaid in the state of Hawaii, then just send the $1 billion to the State Department of Health and let them work with the physicians and the medical clinics and the hospitals and deal with Medicaid here. We don't need a huge federal bureaucracy. They don't deliver any services there. Why would they be involved in this at all? Send the $1 billion to Hawaii. You could have performance measures. Certain things have to occur. Certain people could be covered, and that's it. Let the state run the program itself.
There's been a lot of divisiveness at the federal level in Congress. What do you see as the basic differences between Democrats and Republicans?
Well, I don't think there are simple differences, only because there's a wide range. If I point to Senator Casey of Pennsylvania, he's a Democrat. He's very pro-life, extremely pro-life person. If I point to a Republican senator who is very pro-choice, I'm pro-choice. So, you have people, both parties have a pretty broad tent, but I can tell you that the Republican Party generally is against raising taxes as a first solution to every problem. We believe that businesses and individuals should keep more of their own money. We're generally for a smaller government rather than a bigger government. We don't see government as the solution to everything. We believe, and I believe, government has a very important role to play in society, but I don't think it should take over everything. But again, I think within both parties there is a wide range, and you'll find votes going on in the Congress. Let's take the two Congress people we have now, Hirono and Hanabusa. We had an issue come up about free trade agreement for the Republic of Korea. This is very important to the state of Hawaii because South Korea is a place where many of our residents come from. They have businesses. We do a lot of trade between the Republic of Korea and Hawaii, and one of them, Hanabusa, voted for the free trade agreement, and Hirono voted against the free trade agreement. So you have two Democrats, and they've both been in the state legislature, and they're both lawyers. They have a lot in common, and yet one voted for it and one voted against it. So I think it's not accurate to try to paint a broad picture.
Before the last gubernatorial election, I talked to a former governor who said he felt voters should look at candidates based on their basic beliefs and values because issues change, issues come and go. So if I were to ask you, Linda Lingle, to describe your basic values and beliefs, what's your answer?
Well, let me first expand on what the former governor said to you. I think that that's a good point, to vote on someone's basic beliefs, but I would also say on their character for the very same reason, because you never know what might come up, and you want someone of strong character who will put the people first, who will do what's in the public interest rather than a special interest. Someone you can count on to represent the whole community rather than a specific slice of the community. My basic beliefs is that government can be an important force for good, but that it shouldn't overstep its bounds, that people in our country have a quality of opportunity guaranteed to them under our Constitution, but there's a difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And there's a lot of talk now how everybody should have the same thing, but people don't all put out the same amount. And so I think having a country that has an equality of opportunity is very important. Also, we're a country that does play a role in the broader world stage as it relates to security in this world. Some people say we can't be a policeman for the world, but the fact is the world does count on America and our moral beliefs to step in and to try to keep the world as peaceful a place as possible so that commerce can take place, so that people can have a better life. So my basic belief is that America has an important role to play in this world and that we shouldn't shrink from that role or that responsibility. I think Hawaii has an important role to play in the Asia-Pacific region, and that's something I want to bring to the United States Senate that I don't feel has been fully developed through our representatives. I think Hawaii needs to play a much bigger role than we have for the world and for our own country. I don't think we should take more money from people in taxes than we absolutely need to run the government. We ought to let people enjoy the fruits of their labor rather than government taking it away from them. And I think when you get in office, you should be able to be a person who puts yourself in the position of an average person. And I think I've been pretty good at being able to do that.
Governor Lingle, whether we like it or not, seniority seems to be really critical in Congress as far as getting key committee assignments and being able to direct funding to our state. If you are elected to the Senate in November, what is your commitment to serve? How long would you see continuing to run for the job?
Well, that was an issue that I had to address before I made a decision to run, because you're right. Seniority does matter in Washington, and it matters to the people at home because they want someone who's going to make a commitment over the long term. And while I think you have to take one election at a time, I certainly thought that through before I made this decision, because when you ask people to help you in a race like this, they want to make sure that you're a person who would be committed for the long term. But I wanted to make a point again about your premise that seniority helps you get things for your state. And while that's certainly true, there's not much to get anymore, because we have a $16 trillion debt. So the days of getting very large earmarks for your state are gone. And that means that other skills will become increasingly important, such as the ability to articulate at a national level why a certain expenditure, even though it's in my home state, why it's important for America. So I would be able to explain to a person in any state why Pacific Command in Honolulu has to be fully funded, or why the East-West Center should get funding from the federal government. Up until now, the East-West Center has always been an earmark, and it's still an earmark. I believe it should be a part of the State Department budget, and I would be able to speak in a clear way, and I think in a forceful way, for making this a part of the State Department budget, rather than us having to depend on seniority or making a deal, just that this is important to America and make that case at the national level. So I think my skills and my ability to persuade and my ability to articulate will be increasingly important as the government has less and less money to spend.
And particularly if you go in, you would be a freshman legislator.
Well, I would, and yet I'm a former two-term governor, and so you're looked at a little bit differently because I have a lot of former colleagues who are in the United States Senate on both sides of the aisle, former governors. And we do have a point of view, and that is we like to get things done. We're not as ideological, and that's the way governors think. We come up with our agenda. We know what we want to achieve for the people we represent, and that means working with people of both parties. So having been a governor, I think people see you a little bit differently. They know you've been successful. They know you've run a state government. So I don't think you go in as just yes, you're a freshman, but you're not an unknown quantity in Washington.
Governor Lingle, you mentioned the East-West Center. For those not familiar with that, what is the East-West Center?
It's an Asia-Pacific focused think tank in Honolulu. It's a place that studies the issues important to the region. It also hosts leaders from other nations all over the world. It's located at the University of Hawaii at Manoa campus, and it's a way for us to extend the American philosophy of democracy and liberty into many, many parts of the world, and to study issues in this part of the world that are important not just to our state, our nation, but to the world, because the largest military buildup on the planet right now is occurring in the Asia-Pacific region. So this is a very important institution, allows us to project our influence, our relationships with countries all over this part of the world.
Governor Lingle, when I told some friends that we were going to be talking, they said, oh, ask her about this. For 8 years you were governor. For 8 years you had security. For 8 years, we don't think you drove a car. So everybody was curious. Did you remember how to drive after 8 years of having those big guys protect you and drive you around?
I suppose driving a car is like riding a bike, but I did have to learn a few new things because I drive an all-electric car, and they didn't have those when I became the governor. But I do miss the guys in a personal way. They were terrific family men. They really committed themselves to keeping me safe, but I have to say the freedom that I got the day after, I loved it, and I do now.
Governor Lingle, we're at the end of our time. What have I not asked that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I'd like people to understand not just that this is an important race, they know that, but to separate this race from other races you might be looking at. I often get asked about President Obama being on the ballot at the same time I'm running for the Senate seat. And I tell people, whether you're for President Obama or you're for Governor Romney, that's your choice. This is about Hawaii's long-term future and the importance of making a decision to elect someone who can represent us over the long term, because the average United States senator serves for more than a generation. And that's what the Senate race is about. It's about us here in Hawaii over the long term. So whoever you want to vote for president or mayor or anything else, that should be seen as a separate vote from the vote you cast in the U.S. Senate race. And I believe I'm the person that's best qualified because of my experience of leadership. Neither of the other major candidates have had that experience of having to make tough decisions day in and day out. And those are the only kinds of decisions left in Washington, because all the easy decisions they've made, that's what got us into the mess we're in today. So I think my executive experience, my experience of being a leader during very difficult financial times for the state, and my ability and proven record of working across party lines are the exact kind of skills that a person will need to be effective for our state.